UK's most accomplished party-starting trio, plus their genre-blending know-how all over your ears. With Scratch 22, Legal Money Mike and DJ Paydirt. 7 till 9, Thursday nights on BFM.
Arc Radio, brought to you by Rakinos, for joint since 91.
It's now 12:21.
Oh, here he comes! Hey. Minister!
Minister! How are you? Minister! Answer! Well, how's your wife?
Answer the question, Minister!
Counterclockwise with Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz.
Righty-ho, I've got Mr. Selwyn Manning, our political affairs commentator from livenews.co.nz on the line. Selwyn, just how bad is New Zealand Incorporated tabs getting?
Yeah, it's getting pretty steep out there, Simon. What we owe as a nation in total is up around 4.9% of gross domestic product, which that means around $10.1 billion. That's what we all owe, not just the government owes, but what we all owe overseas interests. But where this has come up as a significant item, apart from, those staggering kind of figures, is yesterday Finance Minister Bill English informed the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee that the current account deficit in New Zealand will likely peak at around 5 to 6% of GDP. So he's expecting it to go up by at least another 1%, Simon. Now, other politicians are saying that he is too confident, that it is potentially going to go up beyond that. And what that means is that our offshore financiers, etc., will get the jitters and start wanting to charge more for the borrowed money, which would push up obviously the cost of debt and also our cost of living kind of aspects, Simon.
Right, so they're not going to be coming for people's second-hand cars and couches from Noel Leemings?
Well, if for example, we can't pay, then those kind of things would obviously be taken from us. But this current account deficit has been something that has been lagging around in New Zealand for some time. Before we go into those trends, I'll just define it a little bit in loose terms. The current account deficit, it's often defined as being like that balance between what we owe as a country to overseas entities compared to what overseas entities owe us as a nation. Now, that current account deficit includes not just what, like I said before, the New Zealand government owes overseas, but also what we all owe, and that includes our debts like hire purchase, our Visa, MasterCard debts, home loans, etc., to banks that are owned by overseas, and just about all of them are owned by overseas. And that all mounts up. If you look at the trends going back, way back to 1990, you had a current account deficit running between 3.5%. In 1990, it crept up to in around 97, up to 6%. It kind of fluctuated there, went down in 2001 with the new Labour-led government and to around 2% of GDP. But then we all felt pretty good about the economy by the mid-2000s. In 2005 through to 2008, it was peaking around about 8%, and quite clearly our overseas kind of interests were starting to get the jitters there.
Okay,
the share market crash, the financial market crashes and the financial crisis globally seemed to cause that, shock horror. And from 2008, where the current account deficit was running over 8%, it dropped down to 0.2 in 2009 under the new government. So big, but it's been creeping up ever since. So
basically, our productive capacity, New Zealand's productive capacity, directly affects our current account deficit, I imagine. We're basically, like, for instance, manufacturing's been in the news lately in terms of our exchange rate is killing manufacturing.
Yes.
How's New Zealand going to pay its way out of this? And the other thing is, how much further have we got to go before we get into a situation like Greece?
Well, yeah, or get better. Just about everybody believes that New Zealand has the capacity to withstand those outside pressures, to not become a Greece. But we've got to be pretty mindful, obviously, and from lay people's point of view and from taking, a common sense point of view, it seems that a lot of the opposition politicians, the leaders and their economic spokespersons are all saying, now's the time for us to think again on how we actually address this problem. For example, manufacturers and exporters, as they're positioning to manufacture goods and export them overseas, have got two significant problems here. One is the cost of borrowed money to kind of get in behind that investment to create the goods in the first place. That creates, an increase in the current account deficit aspects, and then they've got to kind of also harbour and shoulder the burden of that high financial currency rate that you're talking about there as well, which makes our goods more expensive to overseas commercial interests. So all of those kind of things in that area are really, really difficult. We've talked in past weeks about how, the opposition parties all said, we've got to make it make the Reserve Bank more compliant and being able to use tools that reduce our currency down instead of letting it just use the interest rate, OCR, or the official cash rate kind of mechanisms there. And it seems that the manufacturing export community in New Zealand is right in that camp. Bill English and the National-led government are saying, no, the status quo will remain and it's satisfactory, but everybody has got to be mindful of being very, very careful in this environment. This current account deficit's more complex. What we're talking about here, for example, is overseas companies overseas that own New Zealand registered companies, like most of the banks, for example. The profits, when they are sent back overseas by way of dividend, or if it's considered a debt to the parent company overseas, that contributes to this current account deficit that we're talking about. You've got companies here like the banks were mentioned, but also there's a huge raft of healthcare companies that are mainly looking after the older people in New Zealand, but also many other private health areas. They're owned by overseas entities and they contribute to the current account deficit. You've got all of these others like Serco, for example, that the government itself is getting overseas companies to run more and more increasingly the number of privately operated prisons in New Zealand. Now, Serco has been a big player in New Zealand. Its profits that go back to its parent company overseas, mainly in England, contribute to our deficit, not that country's deficit. So all of these things are causing the politicians to think, how can we turn this around? Kiwi Bank was one of the solutions that came out of Jim Anderton way back in the early 2000s. And Kiwi Bank is kind of an unusual bank on the New Zealand spectrum because it's New Zealand owned for New Zealand interests in a sense. And it's this kind of thing that many of the politicians are saying, well, we've got to think more about doing something about this. And it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, it just occurred to me also that the mini housing boom or whatever in Auckland is being funded by debt, basically, and that this could actually contribute to the current account deficit. It's very interesting. I didn't realise that, in fact, the liabilities of private companies operating in New Zealand contributes to that. And it does sound awfully complex. But Selwyn, this is something I think everyone will be very anxious to keep an eye on, and solutions too. If you do stay tuned, I am actually talking to somebody who thinks that greening New Zealand might actually be the solution. But
that's what everyone's wanting to hear, are solutions. For sure. Yeah.
Well, hey, listen, Selwyn, stay tuned, and that's all the time we've got for today. It's been good hearing from you, and we'll talk next week.
Okay, Simon, take care.